all doing well. As for me, weather is getting better around here, so the days are much cooler. There is a nice drift of cold breeze coming from my window right now, and it feels like a blast during these warm days of summer. For today's video, we will continue covering lore from the Rimworld universe, and under popular request, we'll be talking about the Mechanoids. Perhaps one of the most fascinating factions in Rimworld. While they might appear to be just simple robots, Mechanoids are far more than that, and there is a lot of depth to them. First of all, let's get down to the definition of a Mechanoid. Mechanoids are capable of being completely self-sustaining and can take decisions on their own without requiring any type of human input. In Rimworld, they are described as intelligent and autonomous robots built for domestic, industrial, or military purposes, requiring an AI to control them. Despite being endowed with a human-like intelligence, Mechanoids are very different from humans. Their bodies are made out of steel and plasteel. They do not feel pain, have any type of emotion, or understand the concept of mercy. Physically, they are resilient to toxicity and extreme temperatures to the point of being capable of marching through fire completely unscathed. Mechanoids are also capable of complete self-sufficiency, allowing them to remain dormant for hundreds of years in the middle of a forest, buried underneath the soil, enclosed in ancient vaults, or resting at the bottom of the ocean. And while the passage of time may affect them by oxidizing their outer layers, giving them a greenish hue, their combat capabilities will remain unaffected. They bear no weakness other than strong electromagnetic pulses, which will briefly stun any Mechanoid, causing chaos within their systems. But even that is not enough to completely stop a Mechanoid, as their system will quickly adapt to the electromagnetic pulse, rendering the Mechanoid immune to it for the next 36 seconds. The only way to destroy a Mechanoid will be to damage it enough until it will be unable to move or act anymore. An ultra-tech type of weapon that is very fitting for this purpose is the Zeus Hammer, a large hammer that can deal not only a very heavy blow, but also deliver a strong electromagnetic impulse upon impact, temporarily disabling Mechanoids and allowing soldiers to finish them off. While the word Mechanoid is used as a broad term, they can actually be divided in many different categories, each having different origins and purposes. The first category are Earthworld Mechanoids, built for simple purposes such as labor, companionship, or combat. We can assume they are mainly present within large-scale factories or as simple soldier units. The second category are Glitterworld Mechanoids. The difference between Earthworld and Glitterworld Mechanoids is that the ones built on Glitterworld are far more advanced, achieving quasi-sentience and being capable of completing far more complicated tasks, as they are most likely being controlled by an advanced AI, making them capable of learning and adapting to new conditions or situations. The third category of Mechanoids are entirely built and controlled by an architect, obviously malevolent in nature, or at the very least hostile towards humans, as these types of Mechanoids are rarely ever built for labor, and mostly constructed and programmed for war, acting as a hive mind with the sole objective of wiping out any human they encounter. There is a chance that these Mechanoids might have been allies to humans at some point, specifically with the ones belonging to the ancient factions, as they are present within ancient structures, but that is not the case anymore, as Mechanoid hives will display hostility towards any faction encountered. It is likely that many worlds were wiped by Mechanoid armies, downgrading them to the status of Rimworlds, as on these planets we can observe remnants of old wars and a high presence of Mechanoids buried deeply within the soil or standing at the bottom of the sea, awaiting activation or new orders from their architect masters. Mechanoid hives present a large variety of Mechanoid models, created and optimized for war purposes only. Some of the models include, but are probably not limited to, the following. Scythers, fast, spindly human-sized combat mechanoids specializing in rapid approach and close-range combat. Their bodies are covered in points and blades, but they mostly use their two arm blades to lop off limbs or gut their victims alive. Scythers have no fear for their life and will charge directly at enemies with no regard for cover, making them extremely dangerous. But this behavior is also their greatest weakness, as they can be easily lured into traps or shot directly from afar. Scythers move on two legs, are capable of speech, sight, hearing, and even smell, which for a mechanoid is pretty interesting. Smell is a sense associated and required for tasting and eating, but mechanoids do not require to eat, so we can assume that their smelling sensor is dedicated to the detection and tracking of human victims, most likely by smelling the blood from slashing wounds. Their ability to speak is also interesting, as mechanoids are essentially a hive mind. They wouldn't require to vocally speak to each other in order to coordinate attacks or relay information. It is likely that this feature was implemented and used by mechanoids during ages past, possibly when they used to either serve or fight alongside humans, but that feature has now become redundant. Lancers. Fast human-sized combat mechanoids built for medium and long-range combat. Their bodies are light and unarmored in order to allow for better movement and repositioning for shooting, making them vulnerable targets at close range, especially in melee combat. They should be a priority during combat, as their weapon of choice, the charge lance, is fully capable of blowing off limbs or organs with a single accurate shot. Lancers too move on two legs and are capable of smell, sight, hearing, and speech. Pikeman. A clunky multi-legged combat mechanoid specialized as a long-range weapons platform. While effective at distance, it is weak in close-range fights and in melee combat. Veterans of mechanoid wars know that often the safest place to be around a pikeman is by touching it. Despite being often supported by Scythers and Centipedes, pikemen are usually at the very back of a formation due to their long range and slow movement speed. Centipedes. Heavy combat mechanoids that glide on dozens of tiny legs. Their thick carapace and firepower makes them very effective against bunched up static defenders. They are somewhat vulnerable to mobile hit and run tactics. Centipedes can make use of different types of weaponry depending on the centipede. Such weaponry includes heavy charge blasters, a pulse charged rapid fire blaster for area suppressive fire. Heavy cooling allows long deadly bursts. Inferno cannons, an incendiary shot mini artillery device. It fires a large incendiary warhead. Miniguns, a multi-barrel machine gun. Normally unwieldy in human hands, once it starts firing, it fires very fast. Where most self-loading guns are powered by the energy from the gunpowder, the minigun uses an electric motor to rapidly cycle cartridges through the weapon. Centipedes, unlike Scythers and Lancers, are not capable of speech. Other mechanoid types include the Termites, a medium-sized mechanoid. Termites specialize in burrowing, digging, and breaking through defensive structures. Defenders need to decide whether to try eliminate the termite before it can dig through their defenses or take it where it emerges. The Centurion, an ultra-heavy mech with a built-in shield bubble generator. The Centurion carries a point defense bulb turret capable of firing while the mechanoid is moving. The Legionary, a combat support mechanoid with a wide-range bullet shield and mid-range needle gun. Designed to support other mechanoids, the Legionary is vulnerable to anyone who can get inside of its shield. The Militor, a small combat mechanoid armed with a low-powered mini shotgun. Roughly 4 feet tall, Militors lack the power, range, and toughness of more senior combat mechs. However, it is cheap to gestate and maintain, and so is often used as a rear guard or swarm attacker. In war, mech armies are known to send Militors into urban ruins to hunt down survivors after breaking the human defenses. For this reason, they are considered by some to be the most cruel of all mechanoid patterns. The Scorcher, a close approach war mechanoid that specializes in incendiary attacks. Its flame burst attack has little reach, but once it closes on a group of defenders, it can ignite and disrupt them with blasts of searing flame. The Tesseron, a medium-range combat mechanoid. While it is fairly vulnerable to attacks, the Tesseron's sweeping beam grazer attack is so deadly that few opponents can get shots off against it. The Exostrider, a mysterious type of combat mechanoid from a long-over mechanoid war. Destroyed remains of this mechanoid can be found occasionally along Rimworlds. We can speculate that the Exostrider made use of inferno cannons or other similar fire type of weaponry, as they can often be found with intact incendiary weapon cells still attached to their back and remnants of an ancient back-mounted energy cannon. These cells are heavily unstable and will blow up if damaged. The reason for this model's production being discontinued, both by humans and architects, is unknown, but it's likely that it was either too weak for the cost required to fabricate, or that it was simply replaced by a better model, which, if we take its incendiary weapon cells into consideration, might be the Diabolus. The Diabolus, an ultra-heavy mechanoid with an ultra-powerful Hellsphere cannon. Made for siege breaking, its Hellsphere cannon takes time to charge up a shot, but can melt concrete and vaporize bone. The Diabolus dissipates the Hellsphere's cannon waste power in a hit column mounted on its back, which can pulse to ignite flammable objects nearby. This mech's name comes from a 1,000-year-old poem written by a Haspian monk who survived the erasure of its monastery. His religiously tinged work describes a razor-bodied fiend pulsing with flesh-searing heat as it crushed scorched bodies under massive claws. The few who have faced a Diabolus and survived tend to agree with this depiction. The Warqueen, an ultra-heavy mech with a built-in mech gestator. Fed with appropriate resources, the Warqueen can form small Warqueen combat mechs within its massive carapace and deploy them into combat. Warqueens are small, deployable combat mechanoids. They are expendable fighters designed to swarm attack enemies. They are mounted with short-range spinner guns and have a non-rechargeable power source. Even more than other mechanoids, the Warqueen resembles a giant living insect. All war mechs can be terrifying, but humans tend to find the Warqueen disturbing on a deeper level. The Apocriton, probably the most terrifying mechanoid model. The Apocriton is a mechanoid commander designed to coordinate and motivate other mechs during long extermination campaigns. Its most obvious power is its ability to resurrect recently killed mechs by supercharging their self-repair processes. Less obviously, it is intelligent and psychically present, radiating hatred into the minds of anyone in a wide radius. It can also move quickly with its built-in jump launcher. While all the mechanoids have a dim, psychically present intelligence, only the Apocriton and a few others truly feel hatred for their victims and understand the suffering they inflict. This means that the Apocriton does not slaughter its victims because it's been programmed to do so, rather because it wants to do so. While the previously mentioned mechanoids are built for the sole purpose of death and destruction, some models are also created for utility purposes. These models are often met alongside Mechanitors. Mechanitors are humans making use of a mech-like implant to create and control mechanites. Mech-links are a special type of bionic implant that allows direct control of mechanoids. Mech-links are used by soldiers to control war mechs and by workers to control labor mechs. Mech-links are self-installable. Pressed into the back of the throat, the unit injects itself through the flesh to clamp inside the base of the skull where it meets the spinal cord. There it threads a web of ultrafine wires throughout nearby neuronal tissue to make the direct mental link between the user and the mechanoid control band. Mech-links are not simply devices for sending radio signals to mechanoids, because mechanoids are not merely robots. In addition to traditional computers, mechanoids have a dim psychic presence, so fluently controlling them requires a psychic connection. By linking Mechanitor and Mechanoid both psychically and electromagnetically, the Mech-link permits deeper control than screen and button interfaces. Since the Mech-link interlaces deep within the brain tissue, it can only be removed after death. For a Mechanoid to fall under the control of a Mechanitor, it must first be created. Creating a Mechanoid is far different from how one would initially imagine. Mechanoids are not created in a factory by slapping various metal parts together and pushing a button to turn them on. Rather, they must be assembled within a mech gestator, and then they will require to undergo a certain number of gestation cycles in order to become properly functional and linked to a Mechanitor. The mech gestator is a tank of mechanite-rich fluid with support tubes for feeding in materials and nutrients. This process uses harsh chemicals which are stored in toxic waste packs that will require to be removed after a certain point. This process can be sped up through the use of a mech gestation processor, an implant which increases the speed at which a Mechanitor can produce mechs in a mech gestator. The processor optimizes the behavior of the Mechanites in the mech forming tank and can be self-installed up to 6 times per Mechanitor. Other than the gestation, an important material required for the creation of a Mechanoid is going to be a subcore. Subcores are essentially the Mechanoid's brain, and they come in 3 different models. The basic subcore is the simplest type of a Mechanoid brain. It contains a subpersona with a dim psychic presence, and it's fabricated with a subcore encoder, a machine that allows Mechanitors to produce basic subcores. Standard subcores are a standard tier Mechanoid brain, a psychodynamic substrate unit supporting a thinking subpersona. This particular subcore is strong enough to drive standard tier Mechanoids. Mechanoids are more than robots, as we've already said, and this is more than a silicon computer. Its thinking, psychically present subpersona makes it more adaptable than silicon systems. However, this also means it can only be produced by analog parent transfer from another thinking mind, which will require a subcore soft scanner in order to be created. The subcore soft scanner is a pod with thousands of tiny tissue probes and a high energy brain scanner. Once a person is inserted, the system uses the probes and scanner to sense a neuropsychic pattern that it can analog transfer to a new standard tier Mechanoid subcore. The person will be left temporarily sick, but unharmed. For more advanced Mechanoids though, standard subcores won't cut it anymore. The actions and decision-making abilities are far too advanced to be handled by a simple standard subcore, and they will require the usage of a high subcore. The high subcore is a high-tier Mechanoid brain, a psychodynamic substrate unit which supports a sophisticated subpersona. This particular subcore is of the strongest tier, and can power complex ultra-heavy Mechanoids. Unfortunately, if technology is limited within the Mechanitors environment, this type of subcore can only be obtained through the use of a subcore rip scanner. The subcore rip scanner is a pod with thousands of tissue probe injectors and an ultra-high power vaporizing brain scanner. Once a person is inserted, the device will insert the probes into their body through their skin while the rip scanner chews through their brain, reading the reflected radiation and destroying the brain in the process. The subpersona inside this core approaches a live human in its complexity, though it is of a very different nature. Like any such mind, it has a noticeable psychic presence. So while Mechanitors are fully capable of assembling, gestating and controlling combat Mechanoids, they will also have access to worker Mechanoids. Worker Mechanoids come as they follow. Agrihands, a small Mechanoid designed to sow and harvest crops. While it is better suited for labor than combat, it can fight with built-in cutting blades if necessary. This Mechanoid is probably extremely popular on farm worlds. Lifters, a small Mechanoid that is designed for hauling. Cleansweepers, a light Mechanoid designed for cleaning, basically a Roomba. Cleansweepers are capable of performing weak melee attacks if required. Constructoids, a small Mechanoid designed to perform construction tasks. It can perform blunt melee attacks if necessary. Fabricors, a small work Mechanoid designed to craft all manner of manufactured objects. Paramedics, a small Mechanoid designed for non-violent emergency situation management and medical care. The paramedic can rescue the wounded, fight fires, treat the sick, and even perform surgery when a more qualified human is not available. Its built-in jump launcher allows it to jump into and out of emergency situations, and its built-in fire foam popper can quickly extinguish fires. Tunnelers, a heavy Mechanoid built for mining in treacherous locations. While intended for excavation, the tunneler's gigantic power claws and ultra-thick armor makes it a dangerous force in combat. It is important to keep in mind that Mechanitors have a limit to how many Mechanites they can control at once, and that limit is determined by their bandwidth. Mechanoids cannot be gestated and controlled without enough bandwidth, and if a Mechanitor's bandwidth is lowered below the amount required to control the mechanoids under their possession, those mechanoids might start acting on their own, leaving the area and going rogue, or in the worst case scenario, becoming hostile towards their former masters. Despite their brains being capable of managing only a certain amount of bandwidth, Mechanitors have found many ways of increasing it through specialized antennae, suits, and helmets. With the Mechanoid types covered, we can now proceed to discuss how hostile Mechanoid hives behave in combat. Mechanoid hives can wage war in many different ways, either through direct assaults towards human colonies, mindlessly charging towards their targets with the sole intent of death and destruction, or by attempting to weaken and eventually destroy colonies in a war of attrition through more indirect means. Let's start with Mechanoid ships. Within the game, it's been implied and mentioned multiple times that humanity has faced entire Mechanoid hive armies more than once, with these Mechanoid armies utilizing advanced spaceships for war purposes. Parts of these spaceships can be found landing from orbit onto Rimworld, crashing onto the ground and presenting a still active threat. So far, we know of two types of weaponry found on board of these spaceships, namely the Defoliator and the Psychic Droner. The Defoliator's purpose is implied within the name, a device capable of slowly but steadily annihilating plant life around it, with the purpose of destroying forests in order to remove cover and hiding places for enemy combatants, as mechanoids do not make use of cover when fighting, or by ruining farmlands in order to destroy food supplies and weakening enemies over time, but incapable of directly harming any flesh-based biological creature. This type of weaponry seemed to come under two versions, one which spreads pollution over the soil and one that doesn't, possibly in order to maintain the planet itself healthy and still capable of sustaining life afterwards. The purpose of the Psychic Droner is far different than the Defoliator. Psychic Droners make use of an incomprehensible type of archotechnology capable of generating psychic signals that will over time drive to madness humans and animals around it, increasing in intensity over time. At the low level, the drone's influence begins with a subtle, disquieting sensation, described as a scratching at the back of your mind. This initial phase induces mild anxiety and discomfort, akin to a barely audible whisper that is unnervingly persistent. The affected individual perceives vague, unsettling messages that disrupt their mental tranquility. This stage is characterized by a general sense of unease and a premonition of something ominous. You could perhaps try to drown those whispers out with loud music, or attempt your best to ignore them, but I can guarantee that hearing constant whispering, even when trying to sleep, and perhaps even in your dreams, is not going to be a fun ride. As the intensity rises to the medium level, after approximately 2.5 days, the impact becomes more pronounced. The individual experiences a heightened sense of paranoia, as if an unseen presence is constantly observing and communicating with them. The whispers escalate to a coherent yet disturbing message, often involving harmful suggestions. This persistent intrusion into one's thoughts can lead to increased irritability and a struggle to maintain normalcy in interactions. The high level, reached after 5 days, sees the psychic interference becoming overwhelmingly loud and invasive. The victims finds it increasingly difficult to focus or think clearly, often reacting outwardly by yelling or talking back to the non-existent voices. This stage is marked by significant mental distress, manifesting as confusion, frustration, and a loss of control over one's own thoughts. Finally, the extreme level of the psychic drone's effect, observed after 7.5 days, plunges the individual into a state of acute psychological turmoil. The person experiences intense fear and paranoia, characterized by thoughts of violence and self-harm. Physiologically, symptoms include a racing heart and excessive sweating, signifying a heightened state of anxiety and panic. This extreme stage is particularly dangerous, as it can lead to aggressive behaviors driven by the distorted perception of surrounding individuals as threats. While perhaps starting as a minor annoyance, psychic droners will escalate into a major problem over time. Just imagine the potency of such a weapon if used from space without interruption upon a large, highly populated city. Maybe in order to use it on such a large scale, it will require more time to take effect, but just imagine, as the weapon reaches the peak of its intensity, how every person within that city will simply begin decaying into nothing more than a pack of violent psychopaths, attacking everyone around them while under the influence of this psychic weapon. Through the use of this, a mechanoid army will be capable of annihilating entire societies without even having to touch the surface of the planet. Following next, I'm going to present another combat tactic employed by mechanoid hives used to wage war against colonies on Rimworlds, the deployment of a mechanoid cluster. Mechanoid clusters involve the deployment of a fleet of drop pods containing dormant mechanoids, walls, turrets, and various special buildings meant for offensive and defensive purposes. The reason why the mechanoids are initially dormant within a cluster is most likely to conserve energy, as these clusters will be inactive on the ground or orbiting the planet for years before becoming active. Along with a number of mechanoids, clusters can include the following buildings. Mech capsules, a mechanoid storage and deployment capsule. It can contain a number of mechanoids ready to emerge and fight upon being awakened. Mech assemblers, an automated mechanoid factory. It periodically assembles and deploys new mechanoids. The mech drop beacons, a mechanoid reinforcement drop beacon. When activated, it calls in a group of mechs to land in drop pods nearby. Proximity activators, a proximity alarm for dormant mechanoids. If it detects a human-like threat nearby, it will awaken any nearby dormant mechanoids or structures. Countdown activators, a timed mechanoid activation unit. After counting down, it will wake nearby dormant mechanoids and structures. Mech glow shields, a shielding device which projects a momentum repulsor field. Shots can go out but not in. This one is tuned to low angles, so it will block ground level projectiles like bullets. The unit can be temporarily disabled by EMP attacks, either by shocking the projector unit itself or using EMP munitions on the shield. Mech high shields, a shielding device which projects a momentum repulsor field. Shots can go out but not in. This one is tuned to high angle, so it will block mortar rounds. The unit can be temporarily disabled by EMP attacks, again either by shocking the projector unit itself or using EMP munitions on the shield. Mech nodes, a self-powered mechanoid node of unknown function. Mech nodes can be deconstructed to yield valuable resources, but only if they are captured intact. The internal micropower cell will flame out and drain the materials if the unit takes too much damage. Unstable power cells, a mechanoid power generation unit. The vanometric power core will run forever, extracting energy from quantum foam fluctuations. An internal amplifier system makes it unstable. If damaged, the unit will generate a massive explosion. Some brave humans steal these from mechanoids for their own use as power plants or defensive bombs. However, an unintentional detonation can be devastating. Automortars, self-powered, self-loading automatic mortars. It can hit targets at any distance over walls, but is quite inaccurate. Over time, it will slowly destroy even the most protected colonies, making it one of the biggest threats of a mechanoid cluster. It is capable of attacking even when the rest of the cluster is dormant, sieging towns from afar, most likely forcing a violent response, which will in turn trigger and awaken dormant mechanoids at the cluster. Auto Inferno turrets. A self-powered turret mounted with an Inferno cannon. It cannot sense targets at very short ranges, most likely due to angle limitations. Auto charge turrets, self-powered turrets mounted with a charge blaster. It cannot sense targets at very short ranges, once again most likely due to angle limitations. Mini slugger turrets. A self-powered defense turret mounted with a weak but long-ranged slug thrower. May explode when damaged. A small common defensive turret used by mechanoid clusters. Fairly harmless but has incredible range. Psychic droners. An architect device transmitting the thoughts of a mad superintelligence. It generates a massive psychic drone tuned to one gender and affecting a whole region of the planet. People of that gender will be disturbed by the effect, reducing their mood and possibly driving them insane. The effect is modulated by an individual's psychic sensitivity. Toxic spewers, an ultra-attack weapon of mass destruction designed for area denial. This device harvests available compounds and converts them into self-reproducing poisons. By spewing these into the atmosphere, it can poison a whole region of the planet. Smoke spewers, an ultra-attack weapon of mass destruction designed for area denial. By harvesting available compounds and converting them into self-reproducing opaque molecules, it can spew enough smoke to block the sun in a whole region of the planet. It may initially come off as harmless, and while indeed not strong, this device can slow down the growth of outdoor crops, reducing over time the amount of food in a colony. Sunblockers, an ultra-attack machine that generates a sheet of exotic fields at high altitude, turning the sky opaque and blocking the sun akin to an eclipse. Once again, this can drastically affect crop growth. Psychic suppressors, an arc-attack device that generates a massive psychic suppression field tuned to a particular gender. People of that gender have their psychic activity suppressed, reducing their consciousness. The effect is modulated by an individual's psychic sensitivity. Weather controllers, an ultra-attack device for controlling weather. Using chemicals and exotic fields, it forces the weather into a particular configuration. Perhaps seemingly harmless, its strength is dictated purely by the type of weather the controller is tuned to force onto the region. Even a weather as simple as rain, if continuous, could cause great problems over time. EMI Dynamos, a massive electromagnetic interference generator. It interferes with or shuts down electrical devices in nearby regions. It is unclear if mechanoid hives and structures around it adapted against its interference, or if the generator itself is tuned to not affect mechanoids, as any attempts to study a functioning one have resulted in failure due to the inability to use any electronic devices for measurements. Defoliators, area denial devices which annihilates nearby plants without affecting animals. In planetary wars, these weapons are scattered across farmlands or jungles to deny the enemy food or cover. When destroyed, it will release an electromagnetic impulse blast within its close area. Climate adjusters, an ultra-attack device for controlling climate. Using chemicals and exotic fields to manipulate the atmosphere, this device will calculate whether a shift in warmth or cold will be more dangerous for human life, and then lower or increase the temperature by 10 degrees accordingly. So, in conclusion, I hope this video was enough to illustrate both the complexity and the threat that mechanoids pose within the universe of Rimworld. Hopefully I didn't miss anything of importance, and before you ask, the next video is going to be dedicated to covering the insectoids, as they are closely related to the lore regarding the mechanoids, but I felt that it will be better to give them their own video, since this one is already going to be rather long, and because I feel that even if not as complex as mechanoids, they're still an iconic part of the Rimworld universe and are completely deserving of their video. With this said, I hope you enjoyed this lore coverage. If you would like to support my channel, don't forget to like and subscribe, and leave your thoughts in the comment section down below. Let me know what you enjoyed about this video, what you disliked, and what would you like to see next. Thank you for watching, and as always, I wish you a good night.